Hello, BookTube. Thought I'd check in and to let you know what I've been reading the last couple of months in my absence. Perhaps I won't talk about everything because it'll take too long. And to be honest, the bulk of September was actually just taken up by Harry Potter. I was mostly just reading Harry Potter. So I read books 5, 6, and 7. Um, and I watched the films as well. So not much to say about those apart from the fact that I did really enjoy it and it was a fun experience. And also, I read them all on my Kindle, which was again a good experience because I very much neglected my Kindle since the beginning of the pandemic. Really, I stopped using it. So I used to use it on the go, on the bus, and things like that. And then only recently um, I decided to pick it up again, and it wouldn't turn on. So I plugged it in to charge it, and it wouldn't take charge. I thought, oh God, I've killed my Kindle, just neglected it for so long that it's died. But I read online that if you just leave it plugged in for a few hours, it should start to come back to life, and it did. So thankfully, I was able to revive it, and I'll never let it die again. Because I do want to start reading more on the Kindle, and I am. So I'll talk about that more in a moment. Um, what have I been reading? So just this morning, just finished rereading a Ronald Firbank novella called Caprice. This is a pseudo buddy read I'm doing with Sean the Book Maniac, so we're not checking in after each chapter kind of thing, but we will be doing a Zoom chat some point in early November. We just need to schedule that. I mean, it's only about 70 pages anyway, so it wouldn't have been very beneficial to sort of check in every 10 pages. It'd be a bit silly, but much prefer this way round, where you just sort of get on, read it in your own on your own timetable, and then just talk about it at the end. Um, so, so I won't talk about it much here because we'll be doing the Zoom chat. But other than to say, I did really enjoy it, and probably more so the second time round, got more out of it. And judging by Sean's Friday read yesterday, he also seems to be enjoying it. This is his second Firbank work he's read, and he seems to. He said he's gone with it much better than the other one. Might finds it much more accessible, and I tend to agree. It is a more accessible work of his, um, which is good because it means he's will probably be reading more of his work, and also we've both got a sort of, I think it's called like an experimental biography of this author. It looks really interesting, by Bridget Brophy, I believe it is. And I mean, I was going to read it anyway, even if Sean didn't get on with the author and sort of bailed and um, never wanted to read anything about him ever again. But it looks like he will be happy to go on to read that as well, and we might do a pseudo buddy read of that as well. Um, I was a little bit worried rereading this because there's a scene early on which I kind of forgot about, in which the character just basically goes on a bit of a racist rant, and no one really counters her, and no one argues with her, and then the scene just kind of ends, and then that's it. And I thought, well, that's the end of the buddy read. Sean will probably just fling the book out the window at that point. But he didn't, so he must have gone past that point by now. So so that's good. But I'm sure it'll be something we talk about in our Zoom chat. Very much looking forward to it. I hope you're able to tune in when that eventually airs. Looking forward to catching up with Sean as well. So there's that. Just take a quick drink of water if that's all right. One of the best pieces of advice I ever received about public speaking. I hate public speaking. I still do. But at university, someone, I can't remember who it was, I think it may have been a professor, said, just bring up a bottle of water with you, and after every PowerPoint slide or whatever, every point, just take a sip of water, and it forces you to slow down and calms you down. And it did genuinely work. I mean, I was still terrified at public speaking, but it did work. It's probably the only piece of advice that ever did work. So yeah, employing that technique now. But anyway, currently reading Crime and Punishment. Uh, about 400 pages in, and very much enjoying it. It's I actually started reading this once when I was about 21 or 22. I got about halfway through, and I I was enjoying it, but for whatever reason, probably because I was at university and it wasn't on the reading list, probably didn't have time to be reading Crime and Punishment, so I let things get away from me, and I just ended up never picking it up again and basically bailing on it. And I always kind of regretted that, and always wanted to give it another shot because it's one of those books. And so yeah, I finally came around to doing it. Probably not enjoying it quite as much as I did back then. I feel it's very much a sort of young man's book, but yeah, it's still a great book. And I mean, it I it keeps bringing to mind one other book, bizarrely, for me. It keeps reminding me of The Unconsoled by Kazuo Ishiguro. If you don't know, if you haven't read that, it's basically that novel is basically one long dream, and the reason I keep thinking of it is because there's a certain dreaminess to Crime and Punishment. The way characters move from place to place, the way they appear and disappear, the way they interact with each other, and the long speeches, the fact that there are sort of doubles in the novel, uh, the main character and his friend, who both have very similar names, both ex-students, both have very similar sort of thought processes, and there are other doubles in the novel as well. Um, the fact that the main character often can't distinguish between reality and dream or hallucination. There's just a dreaminess to the writing. That might be down to the translation as well, but so it just keeps reminding me of The Unconsoled, or I should say, yeah, The Unconsoled reminds me of Crime and Punishment. So yeah, I have no idea if that's intentional. I'd love to ask Kazuo Ishiguro whether he had this in mind when he was working on The Unconsoled. But the chances of me having a one-to-one chat with a Nobel laureate is probably pretty slim. But nevertheless, would like to know. So this is actually David McDuff translation. The weird thing is, I'm also reading it sort of half and half on my Kindle. So I just got a free copy on Project Gutenberg. And this is the, what's her name? Constance Garnett, I think it is. Translator. She's got a famous Russian translator from sort of early 20th century. And I'm not doing it because I want to, you know, test different translations, although that is a bonus. I'm just doing it because I want to be reading it on the go as well, and it's just more convenient to be reading the Kindle on the go. And also, I tend to read this more downstairs because it's just naturally darker downstairs in my place. Not much natural light sort of penetrates my reading chair, so I have to have like 4 lamps on just to see a normal book. So it's much easier for me to just pick up the Kindle, which is backlit, and read on from there. And then when I come back upstairs, just move the bookmark in the book to wherever I got to. So it's quite weird, but I don't know if I'll ever do it again. But it's working. And if I do it again, it will be with classic novels because you can get them for free or very cheaply online. So yeah, it's just force myself to slow down a bit. Yesterday, was yesterday, yeah, I picked up George Saunders' newest book, Liberation Day, a collection of stories. And I really like George Saunders. He's probably he is one of my favourite writers, really. I think he is perhaps one of the greatest living writers. And I've actually read 3 or 4 of these stories just from when they're published in the New Yorker. but the rest are sort of unseen, unpublished, so new stories, um, including the title story, which is quintessential Saunders. Really, it's a classic Saunders story. It's really quite good. Um, Although I feel I'm sort of growing out of George Saunders a little bit. Um, I recognise it's brilliant, but I just grow a bit weary of him. It comes across almost as like George Saunders parody at a certain point, or using the same similar sort of narrative voice. It works, and he does make it seem really effortless, but it's only so much you can take. And actually, the title story is very similar to the Semperka Girl Diaries, if you've ever read that story from 10th of December. But it's just not quite as good as that. They're both sort of novella length almost, and it just doesn't have the same oomph as that one. But it's good. And I'm about halfway through, and there are a couple of naff stories actually, I have to say, or one at least so far. And some more realist stuff. He sometimes does some more realist stuff, although they're set in the real world, but they're often a little bit quirky. They're not quite real, but they are. And probably my favourite actually, um, the mum of bold action, or the mom of bold action, I should say, um, which is one of those realist stories, and it's really quite funny. The more I think about it, I wasn't necessarily laughing when I was reading it, but I keep thinking back to it, and because he can be quite a vivid writer, I keep thinking, yeah, it's the more I think about it, the funnier it is, and I think it'll be one of those stories that I will return to and keep reading. I can't say that about any of the other stories yet, but um, yeah, it's really quite funny. It's just about this mom who uh, who likes to write in the morning, um, and writes about her kitchen condiments and funny items and things like funny stories, and is also a sort of overprotective parent, and is often worried where her son is, and she calls out to her son and he doesn't respond, and she thinks, right, no, I'm not going to run out into the street looking for him. I'm just going to let him be. I'm sure he's fine. And it turns out he comes home hours later, and he says he went to a bad part of town and he got pushed into a hedge. And of course, the mom and the dad go ballistic, and they're like, we've got to call the police. And they go to the police station, and they're like, right, we picked up this guy who matches the description, this old guy on the same street. Is this him? And the son can't quite identify him. And then a spanner is thrown into the works because the police officers pick up another guy from the same street who looked almost identical to this other guy. And of course, the son can't choose between them which one it might have been. And it turns out they're actually cousins. And I won't tell you what happens from there, but the story goes from there. It is really quite funny. The more I think about it, I'm looking forward to reading it again, actually. Um, so yeah, Liberation Day. I feel like I can't remember if I've said this already, but I hold George Saunders in such high regard, or have such high expectations um, from him, that it's almost impossible for him to meet them. But yeah, a couple of naff stories, but overall pretty good so far. Look forward to reading the rest. Next, well, before that, I read a Dag Solstad novel called Novel 11, Book 18. Norwegian writer. Gotta slow down. Translated by, let's find out, Sverre Lyngstad. And I just picked this up in the charity shop actually. I was a couple of weeks ago. It's an author who's been on my radar for quite a few years. I remember reading an article about him. It must have been in the New Yorker. And one of his books was on my sort of Amazon wish list for years and years. Never got around to getting it. And finally I found this and just started reading it. And First of all, it's just kind of what I was expecting. Pretty unremarkable. Man cheating on his wife, leaving his wife and 2-year-old son behind to go live with his new girlfriend in a town about 50 miles from Oslo. Well, it's just kind of unremarkable. Um, but once I started getting into it, it started to impress me more. There are about 4 main episodes, and I know it's quite a short thing, but there are about 4 main episodes, and the sort of central 2 episodes are what sort of sold the novel for me. The second episode is sort of him and his new girlfriend, who's now living with, join or start up this sort of amateur theatrical company. And his girlfriend is actually a sort of she's the drama teacher at the secondary school, and she's very talented, but she tends to shy away from the lead roles because she wants to give other people a chance to shine in the limelight. Although she's clearly the most talented of the bunch and often shows them up. And the man, he just works. He just tends to do like backstage roles. Bjorn is his name, and helps sell tickets and things like that. But eventually, he does start to take some leading roles and gets into it. And this part of the novel actually just reminded me of Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates. Anyway, just mainly because there's a theatrical company in that as well. But it was just really well done, and I was just fully engrossed in this sort of episode. And then the episode after that, so he's been living with his girlfriend for about 10 years now, or longer. Um, and then his son, who's now at university age, is going to university of a town his father lives in, and asks if he can. They've been in communication, but they don't really see each other. He asks if he can come live with his dad, basically, and this kind of takes him by surprise. But he does, and again, that episode is just really well done, and I was fully engrossed. So yeah, I thought this is really fantastic. Really loving this. The final episode I won't talk too much about because I don't want to give anything away. But he decides to do something which I wasn't really on board with. I don't know if it went over my head or if it was just too sort of philosophical. I didn't necessarily say I wasn't on board with it. It was kind of weird. But it didn't ruin the novel for me by any stretch. But I just wasn't convinced. But overall, fantastic. Really want to read more of this guy's work. Perhaps his most famous is a book called Shyness and Dignity. So that's in print, readily available in English. He's written about 25 novels, but only about 4 of them are available in English. So kind of hoping this guy will win the Nobel Prize at some point, so the rest will be translated, and we get to read them. So I don't know if I know if a lot of you are sort of bilingual. Have you read his novels in Norwegian or other European languages? Are they translated more into German or French or whatever? Do let me know. I'm very interested. Just generally, do you like this author as well? So yeah, good stuff. Moving on. I'm actually quite thirsty as well. So before that, I also picked up Elizabeth Strout's latest novel, hot off the press, actually signed by the author, and she wasn't there. They're just already pre-signed. I'd love to meet her, but I don't think she's coming down to my neck of the woods. Lucy by the Sea, the 4th Lucy Barton novel now. Hopefully not the last, because I really love them, and this is no exception. At first, I thought, this isn't quite as good as O. William, but excuse me. Once I start to get into it, I fall back in love with the narrative voice and the characters, and yeah, it turned out to be as good, if not better, than O. William. If you don't know, it's basically this one is set at the very beginning of the pandemic, and Lucy is sort of uprooted. She's living in New York, but her ex-husband William who's a scientist. He's obviously taking pandemic very seriously and is trying to get his family, Lucy and his adult daughters, out of the city safely into a sort of rural place. So he ends up convincing Lucy to come live with him in Maine, his house in coastal Maine, and that's where the bulk of the novel was set. And there is quite surreal reading, I suppose. I think it's possibly the first sort of pandemic novel I've read about, explicitly about the pandemic that we've been living through, and there are things in it that everyone would recognise. I mean, Lucy herself is quite naive about it. She doesn't really appreciate the gravity of the situation. It takes her a while to sort of, get to grips with it all. William is obviously does appreciate the gravity, and he's a bit of a control freak. He wants everyone to do everything exactly as he says and as he instructs. And there are characters who completely ignore the pandemic and just try to get about their lives without, as if nothing has changed. Playing golf, shaking hands, that kind of thing. We all know people like that, I'm sure. Yeah. So and just generally, it's one of the funniest of Lucy Barton novels. I think there are at least 3 or 4 moments where I really just laughed out loud. It was so funny. The characters, mostly William, to be honest, is such a funny character. But as I say, the narrative voice is so unique, but so easy to fall in love with, and yeah, fantastic stuff. Finally, I think I'll talk about this book, which I'd just started reading in my last video, so I've now, of course, finished it. But Middle Age: A Romance by Joyce Carol Oates. So just to briefly set it up again, this character, Adam Barrent, takes place in this rich town on the Hudson, just about an hour's drive north of New York City. And this character, Adam Brent, tries to save this little girl's life in a boating accident and ends up having a heart attack himself and dying. And what the novel becomes is sort of a panoramic view of that town, Salt Hill on Hudson it's called, and follows the lives of these middle class rich characters who either was in love with Adam, or had an affair with him, or wanted to have an affair with him, or admired him. If the husbands admired him, the wives wanted to be with him. Pretty much no exceptions, actually. And actually, I read a New York Times review of this when it came out, written by what's her name, Kakatana. She's retired now. She was the main book reviewer for the New York Times, and she pretty much just tore the novel apart, and she take no prisoners kind of approach, and I can sort of see why, because it's Joyce Carol Oates. She's probably written greater novels, so she sort of shows no mercy. Like, you write a mediocre novel, we're not going to let it get away with it. Except I just, like, although I sort of understood the criticism, she basically said it was like a TV soap opera, and it was all ridiculous. Like, why was everyone in love with this eccentric, weird-looking character? Doesn't make any sense, and I just kind of get that, but at the same time, I don't really care because the novel worked for me. I just really enjoyed it, and I was fully engrossed with it. So yeah, I think she was being a little bit unfair on George Carl Oates, but I do understand why she might have given it a bad review. But personally, I just really enjoyed it. It probably had one too many characters because it follows character to character, and they largely are the same. You have a wife who's having an affair and was in love with his character, Adam Brent, who, although he's dead, he's kind of a main character in like spirit form, because he's always there, but he's not, really there. People always talking about it more than having memories of it. Or you're a husband who, you're works 9 to 5 in Manhattan and is having an affair and admires Adam Brent. So there are probably one too many characters because they're all kind of doing the same thing. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. Certainly never bored during quite a chunker. And even towards the end, actually, quite surprisingly, I mean, it's a lot of structures, different structures in the novel, like different parts and chapters. You just sort of go along with it, but towards the end, it almost becomes a crime novel. The things that are happening, and it's quite surprising. Well, really well done. I just wasn't expecting it because, up until that point, it's just sort of a literary novel about divorce and affairs and things, and suddenly it becomes a crime novel. But yeah, really good, as I suppose just a testament to the versatility of this author. And personally, can't wait to read more of her stuff. Excellent stuff. So yeah, that's everything. As always, if you've read any of these books, if you want to read any of them, please let me know. Don't forget to smash that like button, and see you in a couple of months, I guess. Thanks very much.